I get it, you clicked on this video because you understand that calculation determines the destiny of pretty much every single game that you play in chess. Or maybe you're just tired of Gotham Chess screaming at you. Or maybe you're just fed up with all of those not native English-speaking guys with a horrible accent and you're a big fan of my true American accent here. Whatever the reason is, it's time to improve your chess, so let's get started. What's up, chess player? Welcome to the Journey to Grandmaster, the place where you can improve every single aspect of your chess game. And today's topic is all about calculation, how you should calculate the variations, what kind of aspects you should take into account in the first place, and of course, how not to miss the most dangerous opportunities from your opponent. I want to start with this kindergarten task. It's White to move. It's an example of one of the games I have played recently. You need to find the best move for White. Feel free to pause the video for a second, calculate the variations, and of course, take a look at your opponent's opportunities. Okay, I hope you have found it. The best move here is knight takes e5, sacrificing the knight because, well, if your idea was to play rook a to c1, instead that's also fine. Sometimes you need to make that choice, like development is the most important thing in chess. You need to bring all of your pieces into the game and be as active as possible, because that allows you to create those dangerous opportunities for your opponents and basically gives you those tactical chances. But at some point you need to decide between the initiative, because on the other hand, the initiative is actually what allows you to win your games in chess. When you are a little bit more active than your opponent, if you have a little bit more pieces developed than your opponent has, you have this exact moment to use this chance, because the material might be equal and you don't know what to do. But if you don't use this exact moment, this initiative, then your opponent is going to be able to stabilize the situation and the opportunity is gone. So at some point you need to take use of it. And so knight takes e5 is exactly the move which is doing the best move in the position, because exactly now we have this chance. The idea behind that is this bishop is against the queen on the same diagonal, and normally it's very, very dangerous for the queen to find itself in such a situation. But before making such a move, you absolutely must calculate what your opponent can do. So first of all, to find that move, you should use the 4-step system formula, which is checks, captures, threats, and active moves. So you start in that order specifically, because if you have a very dangerous check and you put it on the end of your way to calculate, then you might miss this golden opportunity, because that check might turn out to be, well, just not possible to deal with and end up being a checkmate. But if you don't have any checks, that is the case here, you need to proceed to the step number 2, which is captures. What can you take here? Well, we only can take here the pawn on e5. You can take it both ways, and of course you need to calculate all of those opportunities. Like, I understand in the beginning it might seem very slow to you, like come on, I should really do it on every move, it's gonna take so much time, I'm gonna lose every single one of my games on time. And yes, in the beginning it's going to be slow, but with the time you're kind of automating this process in your mind. And of course, I'm not doing that every time in my games. Perhaps I should at some point, because I also am guilty of missing some chances because I'm not strictly following this formula. But believe me, this is going to make all the difference in your chess games, and you're gonna play so much better if you use it every single time. And very important, both for you and for your opponent. Because you are never playing alone. Your opponent is also sitting there having his dreams, hopes, and ideas, and you absolutely need to take it into account when you think about your moves. So when I think, how can I proceed here? I calculate my options. I think, okay, bishop e5, I'm attacking that queen, I'm taking the pawn. What can my opponent do? And I start with the most active opportunities. And I start with the most active opportunities for him. So does he have any checks? No, not really. Can he capture something? Yes, he can capture my bishop. Knight takes e5. Do I have any follow-up? I start with a check. I don't have any checks. I have a capture. Knight takes e5. Then he takes back. And then I haven't achieved nothing because, well, I'm just a piece down in that. Doesn't work. So I have another capture. Knight takes e5. Whether that works? Well, once again, what are the active opportunities for my opponent? He can take it back. How can I proceed afterwards? What kind of opportunities I have? Of course, you have to do that without the moving on the pieces on the board, because once you move it, it's too late to change anything. But I'm just doing it here for you to simplify the process. Now we continue in the same fashion. Checks, no checks, captures. Well, the only pieces we can take here is the knight on e5 as well as the pawn on c7. If you take on e5, once again, we are back to the same variation, which is very poor for us. We are just exchanging two pieces for one and a pawn that is not a great exchange. So another one is queen takes c7. So let's see what happens after queen takes c7. This move feels interesting because we are attacking both knights at the same time, and there is a tactical shot for black here, knight to f3 check. Remember, we always start with checks, both for us and for the opponent. And here, it turns out it's not that great, because in the end of the day, we are just taking that knight back, and we have a bunch of extra pawns, so this variation is huge for white. The problem, though, is that after queen to c7, not only knight to f3 check is possible, but also just knight b to d7, cementing the position, just protecting everything, and then we are still having a disadvantage here in terms of material. Now if we play f4, just trying to win that knight, then knight f3 would be possible, exchanging the knight for a bishop, and we don't have that opportunity to take the knight in the end of the day, so we are basically in trouble. Now we still have the initiative to compensate this extra material, and this position is not that bad for white, but it's not what we wanted to achieve in the first place. So if we are not satisfied with a certain variation, we go back to the initial position and think whether we have a better opportunity here. So we tried checks, no checks, we tried captures, doesn't work. The third step is to create threats. And you create threats in a certain order, starting with the biggest piece. First of all, can you create a threat against the king, then the queen, then the rook, the bishop, and finally the knight? Well, we can only create a threat against the knight here, but it's a very dangerous one. We play f4 using the fact that we have here this pin, we attack the knight twice, the knight can't go away because of the queen hanging there, because of this very annoying pin, and knight f3 check doesn't work because our bishop is simply protected. So that is the right solution here. After f4, I got a huge initiative and won the game easily. Now, I know you are here not because of me and my stupid games. You want to take a look at the best of the best, Hikaru Nakamura, how he calculates the variations, how he uses those principles, how he manages to find his opponent's opportunities and find those absolutely brilliant combinations. That is exactly what we are gonna do here. That is probably the best game Hikaru Nakamura has ever played. He played as black against Boris Gelfand. It was the King's Indian Defense, so absolutely instructive. Let's take a look at it. Imagine how cool it would be to play chess without ever having opening troubles again. What if I told you I could teach you all openings you will ever need in just 10 days? You get lifetime access to more than 110 pure value video tutorials, almost 100 practical tasks to apply your knowledge immediately into practice, 30 plus bonus videos to dive 10 times deeper, as well as private community where all questions you might ever have are answered daily. Get the $200 limited time discount with the link in the description and forget about all opening pain once and for all. The game starts with d4, knight f6, and Boris Gelfand is an exceptional player. I admire him so much. He has plenty of huge, incredible chess books. I definitely recommend you take a look at it if you haven't studied it already. But, well, those are kind of advanced books rather, so you might be careful with that, but they're just exceptional. So knight c3, bishop g7, that is the starting position of the King's Indian Defense. And here white has a huge choice of opportunities. Knight to f3 is a classical variation, very popular line. And the story about the King's Indian is that it's always better for white according to the engine. It's better, you can have +1, sometimes even more than +1, until at some point you're just checkmated as white. And that is why players as black love this opening so much, because they can outplay their openings. Just understanding those key principles, you don't really need to remember very huge variations. If you understand what you do here as black, namely that you need to attack on the king side and just push everything forward. Of course, there are some nuances, we are gonna dive deeper into it in a moment, but if you understand those principles, then you can basically beat anyone and you don't care. Of course, if white is very advanced from a level point of view, it's going to be more difficult, but still you follow the same principles. So, Black starts here with a move e5, which is basically a pawn sacrifice, but if you try to win it, it's not going to end well for you. You can take here knight takes e5, but then you open up this huge diagonal for the bishop here, and also notice that you are breaking the golden principle of chess opening. You're making more than one move with the same piece, because this knight moves twice now, and Black is very well developed. The rook is active, the bishop is just screaming, just open the road for me, I'm gonna destroy everybody. And that makes it possible for Black to play knight e4, win the pawn back, and then Black is totally fine. So that is the tactical justification behind the move e5, and of course, Boris Gelfand is incredibly educated player. He knows the series so much, so he is not going for it. Now White plays d5, this knight goes to e7, and Black is of course preparing the move f5. Meanwhile, White is trying to attack here, so it's kind of a hint for you to understand what to do after the opening. You look at the pawn chain. You see that Black has here a pawn chain which is going into this direction. It's a hint for you where you need to continue your game. So you want to continue that pawn chain, well, in the best case scenario, all the way through until you get to your opponent. Whereas White is, of course, attacking on the other side of the board. Well, here you have a small chain, yet it could be also bigger like that sometimes, but White is attacking on this side of the board and trying to get to White to Black's position, before Black is able to give a checkmate. That is, of course, more difficult because Black has a very certain goal. I just want to give you a checkmate. Whereas White, yeah, I want to attack positionally, create some weaknesses, for example, here on d6, and hopefully get to it. But it's not as dangerous as giving a checkmate. So yeah, that is the trade-off. On the other hand, White is having more space, White is more active, and White is objectively better according to the engine. So let's see what happens here. Knight d2, knight goes to e8 to make f5 possible here, and also this knight is helpful later on to protect those weaknesses that White is trying to create. Before f5, you see that all of that is still a theoretical variation. That is, of course, well, the drawback you might say about those King's Indian defense, that you can just learn the variation. On the other hand, it might be an advantage. You can just learn the variation till a very certain point where it's basically already about giving a checkmate. It's about who is going to be the first one. But the moves are kind of automatic. You understand that you want to attack here. You know this principle. I want to attack. Then you ask yourself, how can I make it possible? This knight has to go away. Then you find a square for it to go. If you go to d7, then it's blocking the bishop, so you go to e8. What I mean is, you don't need to necessarily learn it by heart. Of course, if you play it more often, you already memorize everything naturally, but if you understand the principle of what you need to do, you don't need to memorize those horrible long variation. You just it just comes to you naturally. f5, c5, knight goes back to f6 to put even more pressure in the center here, because you don't want just to take on e4, because that's gonna make it much simpler for White. You have a beautiful knight here on e4, and it's very difficult to do something against it. Even if you try to exchange, there is a second one supporting it. Otherwise, the knight is beautiful on e4, attacking that pawn on d6, which is going to become a weakness. So that is not what Black wants to do. Instead, they want to continue this chain here and, well, go on with g5, g4, and just crush White there on the king side and get to the king eventually. Knight goes to c4. You see that is still a theory line. Incredible stuff here. Knight goes to g6. All of the black pieces are going to one side of the board, the king side. All of the white pieces are going to another side of the board, the queen side. And it's really the question, who is going to be the first one? Rook to f7. Basically, b5, White is already creating this threat of winning the pawn on d6. So that is exactly the moment when Black is taking it. Bishop takes and h5. Still, the theory, a lot of games have started from this position, but what happened next is absolutely astonishing. And you're gonna enjoy this combinational game from Hikaru Nakamura so much, so stay tuned. g4 is coming. You already feel that, well, we are near the king. The king can already feel the pressure. b6, we go on g3, we want to get to the king. King goes to h1. That is, by the way, always a very useful move for White, just trying to say, well, You can take your pawn on h2, but I'm kind of in a house there. Nothing is dangerous for me, but it's not that simple. Of course, Hikaru wants to get there. Bishop f8. Well, this move is kind of saying I want to exchange that bishop on c5, because notice that with all of the pawns on the dark squares, the bishop is not doing much, it's not really active, so bishop goes to f8, and that bishop on c5 is of course incredibly active for white, so that feels like a very good exchange. But white says, I want to go forward, I want to use this momentum and play d6. Now, some crazy stuff is about to begin. A takes b, bishop goes back to g1, knight goes to h4. We are going all in into the attack. You see that here on the queen side, black is absolutely busted. You give a free like 2 tempi for white and you're just completely done as black. You have absolutely no chances. So Hikaru uses this chance right now to attack and to go on. Rook goes to e1. That is, yeah, feels a little bit like a slow move, but well, you're scared as white. You are afraid of get checkmated, and you try to find those opportunities to be a little bit more comfortable, to be a little bit more solid, and yeah, protect your king somehow. So rook goes to e1, but now here it comes. You can pause the video for a second trying to find the best move for black. It applies to every single position starting from here, because what you're about to witness is one of the most amazing sequence of moves in the entire chess history. I hope you have found it, because even the engine is pretty confused here. The move is knight takes g2, and you see the question mark here. But if you carefully look at the engine evaluation, you see that that is basically the best move according to the engine. So that is how complicated this position is. And by the way, King's Indian defense is one of those rare openings where the engine quite often gives a wrong evaluation of the position, because when the position is so closed, it's difficult for the engine to understand what's going on. When the position is completely open and craziness happens on the board for people, for engine it's easy because you can just calculate, I go here, he goes there, and so on. But in those closed positions, it's much more complicated than that. But here it becomes crazy. So knight goes to g2, basically sacrificing the knight, and the right way for white to react is just to take this knight. But it's incredibly scary to do that, because now the rook comes to g7, this discover check is coming, that queen is coming to the h4, look at this bishop control and everything along that diagonal. I mean, that is incredibly scary here. So white said, well, you can do whatever you want, I just want to get to your queen, because once we exchange the queens, well, your attack is basically over, you can never give me a checkmate. Now, feel free to pause the video for a second, because there is only one move for black, which is good one, but it's also completely winning here. So how do you calculate variations? We need to start with the most active moves. You remember, we don't have any checks available because this king is hiding on h1. Right now, we cannot give any checks. Now, the second step is captures. What can we take? We start always with the biggest thing we can capture and go all the way to the bottom. So we can just take the queen on d1, but there is a difference between taking a piece and exchanging it, because exchanging doesn't really applies to making an active move. Exchanging is just swapping the pieces off the board. It's nothing active you can do, especially if you want to attack, if you have the initiative, if you're on an attacking side, if you want to give a checkmate, exchanging the queens is the worst thing you can do. So queen takes d1 basically loses the game immediately here, just rook takes. Now you have this pawn on c7 still alive, you have this knight hanging. That is just a nightmare, you never want to do that. Then, remember, we are on step 2, we calculate the captures. We have knight takes e1. So once you see the candidate move, you need to calculate the variations, what's going to happen afterwards, and very, very important, what your opponent can do, what kind of opportunities he has. So first of all, when we play knight takes e1, we create a huge threat of checkmate in 1, g2. So basically, white has no time to take our queen, either with the queen or with the pawn, doesn't matter. Checkmate is coming, so he has to do something about it, and that is already a huge, huge thing. When you not only make your move, but create a huge threat for your opponent, that limits his opportunities a lot, and if it's a checkmate threat in 1, that limits his opportunities hugely. So knight takes e1 is the right move here. Of course, you need still to think what happens after queen takes e1, proceed the variation a little bit, but frankly, If you can just win the exchange and your opponent has to take that knight back, that opens up the opportunity to give a check in the future. That is 99% of the cases already enough to make that move, and then it's going to be simpler for you to calculate further in that resulting position. So here, how do we continue? Black to move. Once again, feel free to pause the video for a second and try not only to find one move, but a sequence of moves. What could opponents do, how you're going to continue, and so on. I hope you have found the right move. That is g2, sacrificing the pawn here, giving a check with an idea to open up the g file and provoke that king to go to your place so you can attack it. That is exactly what this g2 pawn is aiming for. King takes, and notice that this queen is hanging, it's going to be hanging for a while. Nobody cares about it. All you care in chess is actually to give a checkmate. As long as you achieve that, you don't care if you lose all of the other pieces which you don't need for that exact reason. So that is what happens here. How to continue? Of course, we always start with a check. Basically, the only reasonable check is rook to g7. There is also bishop takes to h3 check, but that just loses the bishop without a very good follow-up. So rook to g7. The king just hides, goes back. How do we continue? Well, remember, checks, captures, threats, active moves. Checks. The only one is rook takes g1, but that results in queen takes g1 back. So you just calculate the variation. If it's bad for you, you just go on with your system. That doesn't work, we go on. What can we take? Well, the only thing apart from this bishop again that we can take is this pawn on c7, but the problem with that is we are kind of giving a free tempo to our opponent, and we don't want that. We want our opponent to constantly feel that pressure and have some threats to deal with. So maybe we'll just keep in mind that we can just take that pawn, and actually from a material point of view it might be not that bad, because remember we won an exchange, but maybe there is something even better than that. So we proceed our first step system formula. The next step is creating a threat. How can we create a threat? We begin always and always from the biggest, the most important piece, which is of course the king in chess. How can we create a threat for the king? Well, that could be a checkmate threat. How can we create that? Well, we can play bishop h3 and threaten bishop g2 checkmate threat in one move once again. And then limits our opponent's potential, namely he cannot take the queen, he doesn't have any time for that because he needs to care about his king. Now, very instructive point. Bishop goes back to f1. How do we continue? Because now suddenly our queen is hanging and our bishop is hanging. We don't have any time to just play queen takes c7. By the way, very important, before you even start calculating your moves, your opportunities, thinking about your ideas, you have to forget about all of that for a second and think about your opponent's move. What is the idea of that move? What is your opponent hoping to achieve with that move? What is the obvious threat and maybe a hidden threat? Because sometimes, yeah, there are moves that seems to be like, okay, he just developed the knights, I don't know, that's normal, let me just continue my stuff. But no, it turns out that he hasn't just developed the piece, but also created a huge threat for you, and you need to be aware of that. So there are two threats, so it doesn't help to take the c7 pawn. How do we continue? Well, we don't have any checks available because bishop g2 runs into bishop takes g2. We have here bishop takes f1 capture, which still creates a threat of bishop g2, so that would satisfy. But you remember that exchanging the pieces is actually not the same thing as taking a piece. And exchanging helps the side who is defending. So if bishop takes f1, queen takes, and now we have just exchanged those bishops, and we don't have any threats anymore. Of course, the position is still fine for black, even better, but we have a much better move. So we continue. We don't know if we have a better move, of course, beforehand, so we continue the process. The third step, if we can't take anything anymore, is creating a threat. How can we create a threat? First of all, we start with the king. How can we create a threat for the king? We take a look at our pieces. Okay, the bishop, we can't really create a new threat with the bishop. The rook, once again not. Well, we have rook takes g1, but that's just exchanging the rook for a bishop, and we don't have a very good follow-up afterwards. We have the queen. Can we use the queen somehow to create a threat for the king? Turns out we can, because there is a very weak pawn here on f3 which is unprotected, and we can use our queen to attack it. Of course, before making the move, once again we need to calculate the variations. What can happen? First of all, Whenever you touch any single one of your pieces and you plan to move it to a certain square, think, can this piece that you have just moved be taken? That alone would save you from a majority of the blunders you make. Even really experienced players, even I do that from time to time. We just blunder our pieces in one move. To prevent that, before you make your move, just make sure that piece cannot be captured, or if it can be, you're okay with that. Because here, the queen is under attack, it can be captured. But we are completely okay with that, because remember, that bishop went to f1 to deal with our bishop g2 checkmate threat. So if the bishop goes away again, then we give that checkmate. So this queen is hanging for like 5 straight moves. Nakamura doesn't care because he wants to achieve his goal, which is the ultimate goal in chess, given a checkmate. The white plays knight takes e5. That feels like a huge move. Now we are not only defending that pawn, so we are dealing with the threat, but also we are attacking the queen. So once again, a lot of pieces are hanging. How to continue from here? I hope you get the point by this time. We need to start with the checks. We have rook g1 and bishop g2. Both moves doesn't seem to work. Like, yes, after rook g1 we have a follow-up check, but the queen can just block it and then we don't have anything afterwards. We are coming to the captures. What can we take here? We always start with the biggest pieces. We cannot take the queen, we cannot take the rook. We can take the bishop, and we can do that both with the queen and with the bishop. Now, if we take with the queen, that seems like the most active move. Queen takes back, now we don't have any checks, we have to take the queen back, rook takes back, and then we count the material. Turns out it's not that great in terms of the material, because white has a lot of pawns here, c7 is still alive, and that is, while it can still be okay, maybe not the best move. What else? We need to calculate all of our active moves. We also have bishop takes f1. Well, in this case, this queen has to take back, because otherwise checkmate is coming, queen is still untouchable. And then we need to consider what has changed in the position. The queen, first of all, the bishop is not there anymore, and the queen is not on e1 anymore, it's on f1 now. And what the queen was doing on e1? You always need to consider two things when whichever piece is moving on the board. First, what it's doing now on the square it is that it wasn't doing before. So what the queen is doing on f1, what it wasn't doing on e1, well, it guards those squares, it attacks the queen, and what the queen is not doing anymore because it's no longer on e1, well, it's not protecting the knight anymore, and that variation works for us because we win that knight, and that's exactly what Nakamura did here. He took the knight on c3, now attacking those guys as well, and black finally achieves a huge material advantage and decisive advantage here. Rook goes to c1, queen goes to e5, c8 queen. Well, seems like white is getting back the rook, but it doesn't matter anymore because queen to e6 and white just resigned here. The reason is we still have an extra piece here, the knight. The rook is hanging, so we are about to take here, and white's king is still in trouble. If the queen ever goes anywhere, then we can come back and deliver that checkmate. So absolutely no chances for white to handle it. Now that you have that knowledge and you know the principles, it's time to apply it into the real practical task. Hikaru Nakamura played this game against no one other than Magnus Carlsen himself. It's black to move. Your task is to find the best move for black. But remember, it's all about calculating the lines. It's not just one move that you need to find. You also need to find what your opponent can do about it, and then how you can continue afterwards. Incredibly important. So black to move, write your solution in the comments, please. We are gonna discuss it because it's not that simple. It's not like you're making one move and the game is over. Well, Magnus Carlsen also has some ideas in mind, and of course he is not ready to resign just like that, so you need to prove that you are ready to win this game, and that's going to be very instructive. Definitely take time to solve this task, and I see you in the comments. Once you are done, in this video I have prepared for you another very instructive lesson from Hikaru Nakamura himself. Absolutely astonishing game, just as great as this one, if not better. So you're gonna learn so much and deeper your understanding and improve